Boa tarde, pessoal. Hoje a gente vai dar continuidade para o minicurso do professor Elipe. Ele vai apresentar novamente, agora, a continuação, né, da solução integral da equação de Kepler, tá? Obrigada, professor.
Thank you, Alessandra. Well, yesterday, the other day, was the preparation for the talk of today. Today, we will try to solve the Kepler equation, at least, by using what we explained the other day, this integral solution. All that is known, the two-body problem, the relation between the true anomaly and the eccentric anomaly. And this is the problem that we want to solve. If we know what is T, we know the mean anomaly, and then we have to solve this equation because we are interested in obtaining the eccentric anomaly. So this is the classical problem of the Kepler equation, and as I told, we are trying to solve it for more than 300 years. So it's a very old problem, but also is continuously there are new results. The other day, I left with the impression that part of the audience were a little lost with some mathematical concept, mainly with the complex number and things like that. So today I will try to explain that all that is very, very simple, that you know that maybe in other contexts, but you know that. Okay, so let's suppose that we have a number, a complex number, z, may be written as x plus the imaginary unit, that is the square root of -1, times y, with the x and y real numbers. So this is a complex number. And all operations that we can do with that, but to take into account that I is the square root of -1. So then I to the square is equal to -1. Knowing that, everything is very, very simple. We may define the conjugate of the complex number just changing the sign, this plus putting minus. So this is the conjugate of the complex number z. And the norm is the square root of z times z conjugate. That is the square root of x squared plus y squared. So exactly the same as if we were in the plane, R2 plane. And if we have one point here, z, maybe we can define the horizontal axis as the real part and the vertical axis as the imaginary part. And taking into account that, we can handle complex number as if they were points of R2. And we can use the polar coordinates, that will be the distance from the origin, that is the norm of the complex number, and the angle with respect to the real axis. So we can write this complex number as the norm times cosine phi plus y sine phi in polar coordinates. And also we can put in a more compact way this expression as this. We don't touch that. This is a real number. And instead of writing cosine phi plus y sine phi, we put the exponential of I phi. We can use either this expression or this or this. So the three are equivalent. This is more classical in R2 in the plane. And y means that is in the vertical axis. As if we have a vector and put a comma and will be split. So this is almost all that we need to know about complex number. Yesterday we were mentioning circles. So what is a circle? In the plane R to the square, the circle is given by the center of the radius, so it's the locus of the points that with the points x, y, with the distance to a fixed point that is the center is always constant and equal to r. So this is the definition of the circle. So we compute the distance between any point in the plane xy with respect to the point x0, y0, and the distance to the square must be equal to the radius to the square. So this expression we can put in this form, and if we put this here, a square, we obtain precisely the equation of the circle. So this is a circle, and this is in parametric coordinates, and this angle is the parameter of this curve of the circle. And also we can put in vectorial form, because taking this, the two components, there will be a vector. I put the line below, will be equal to a vector which component x0, y0, plus r, first component cosine phi, second component sine phi. So what happens instead of having the plane r to the square, we are in the complex field. So it's exactly the same. We remember that we can represent the complex field as a plane. So this vector will be a complex number, the center will be a complex number, and the r will be the radius of the circle, and instead of putting a vector, we have cosine phi plus sine i5, and I don't know why in the office things were well and now are not well. No, maybe it's not possible. Here was the expression of the circle. That would be the same as here, but putting instead of having this, to put as e to the y5. So this will be the expression of a circle in the complex field. Will be the center, a complex number, plus the radius, that is a real number, e to the i5. This will be the expression of a circle in the complex plane. Very simple, not the same as in the plane. Another question that appeared yesterday was that I was mentioning an analytical function in C, an holomorphic function, that maybe for some of you this were the first time that you heard holomorphic, but no problem, because the holomorphic function, roughly speaking, is equivalent to an analytical function, the same as in R and in R to the square. And what does it mean? That means that it's infinitely differentiable. You have all the derivative, and also is equivalent that locally the function is equal to its Taylor series. You can expand the function in Taylor series, and it's exactly the same as the function. It's not an approximation, it's exactly the series, provided that you don't truncate the series, otherwise no. So when you see this word, holomorphic function, that means that has infinity derivatives. This is the only thing. It's a very, very smooth function. More details. In one of the theorems that I used, we were with the U that was a connected subset. What is a connected subset? The global idea is very simple. It's a subset of the domain that has no holes. So we have the real and the imaginary part, so this will be U. If there has no hole, it's connected. If it contains a hole inside, it's not connected. I am sure that in the topology of R2, you use this concept. So it's exactly the same in R2 that in the complex. So let's continue. Let's suppose that C0 that belongs to this domain is a simple zero of F. That means, because it's a zero, that F evaluated in number is equal to 0. Now F is not a real function, it's a complex function. Okay? But the concept is the same. It's a 0 when evaluated there is 0. And if it's a simple 0, that means that in theory we can put F as the product of this quantity times a certain function G that maybe we are not able to obtain explicitly who G is, but in theory we can put that, and with the condition that G does not vanish at zeta 0. Why? Because if G vanishes at zeta equals 0, will be not a simple 0, will be a double of order 3, order 4, and so on. So simple 0 means that we can put in this form. So G will be the quotient between the function divided by 3 minus C0. If F is an analytical function or holomorphic function, this function will be also analytic because does not vanish in the denominator, and also will be analytic the inverse of this function. No, not the function inverse of the function, but the inverse of the function. That means 1 over G. It's not here, but could be 1 over G will be also analytic. Okay? And all that because it's a simple 0. That was something that we use. And more things. We will use the line integral of a function in the complex field. But we know how to compute line integrals in a vector field, not in the complex, but in the vector field. For instance, a vector field will be a function between r to the square over r to the square or r to the cube over r to the cube. This will be our first. And I think that you show that in calculus in several variables. Gamma is a smooth curve in R2, and R is the parameterization of this curve. Okay? And the line integral is defined as an integral. We write the line, the curve here, of the dot product of the field, the vector field, times the derivative of, or the differential of the curve in this parameterization. With that, we obtain here a number. So this line integral is precisely a normal integral in only one variable. Okay, we are in R2 or R3, but essentially we compute the line integral as a normal integral in one variable. And if the curve is a closed curve, so we denote that by putting this circle along the integral sign. So always, every time that we meet something like that, that means that we are computing a line integral over a closed curve. And also from calculus in two variables, or in several variables, you know this theorem that says that A and B are equivalent. A says that the field is conservative in the domain. And I forgot what is the problem with there is nothing where to look at that. Okay, so the second part, the B, is that this integral is equal to 0. So if the field is conservative, the line integral over this is equal to 0. And I'm sure that you use this in physics, for instance, to prove that the work along a path, the path is closed, the work is 0. Or, in other words, if the path is not work, the path is not closed, the work depends only in the value of the work in the initial point and the value of the point in the final point. Whatever path you choose, it doesn't matter because the result will be the same. And also, this is applied for instance, in the Green theorem for computing double integrals that can be written in terms of a line integral. So if the field is conservative, that means that the partial of f with respect to y is equal to the partial of f y f sub x, the component x of the field over with respect to y. If these two quantities are equal, this is 0, and therefore that's 0. So this is the Green theorem in the plane. That means that we are accustomed to see that under certain conditions, this line integral may always be 0. Well, this is what will appear in the theorem that I mentioned yesterday, is the Cauchy's integral theorem in the complex field that says that if we have a function that is holomorphic in a simply connected domain, we already know what does it mean. That means that the domain has no holes and the function is very nice. No peaks, completely nice. So the theorem says that for any closed line in the domain, this integral is 0. More or less what I explained that happened with the conservative fields in R2 the square. So in our case, the function is not, remember that I say that the function g was holomorphic, so the inverse of the function will be holomorphic. So this is the inverse of the function. So by virtue of this theorem, if we evaluate the integral over a closed curve, this is equal to 0. And this is very important because from here we put in one part z and the other part c sub 0. This will be equal to c, to that. And this is a constant because it's the fixed point. So we put out of the integral. So therefore, the 0 is equal to this, to this part divided by this part. And this is the theorem of Jackson. Understood? Better than yesterday? Okay, so now we can proceed. This is the theorem that I just explained it, that we compute this, the zero of the function f as the quotient between these two line integrals. As I have mentioned, this is a very nice formula. The formula is in closed form, but in the practice, we have to do that. It's necessary to define a Jordan curve. Forget the word Jordan, it doesn't add nothing. It's just a technical word, just a circle or whatever other line, closed line. And also it's necessary to define which is the numerical quadrature method that we are going to use to solve that. So that reminds me a phrase of Professor John Jenkins that said, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. So this is what happens here. In theory, everything is perfect, but in the practice, there are many differences. Okay. Our function is the Kepler. Because we want to have a quantity that will be f of c0 equal to 0, we put the m in this part. Okay? So this will be our function. M constant, because it's given at a certain instant of time, this is given. And the eccentricity also is given. So we have to deal only with this. But this is a complex number, don't forget that, okay? Because we are no longer in the real plane, we are in the complex plane. I did not touch nothing. Okay, yeah, it's working. And we need to find a curve, closed curve, that encloses only the unique real solution. Only one. That is what says the Jackson theorem. Only one. If it takes two possible zeros, it doesn't work. So to work with many details in order to ensure that our curve inside there is only one zero. Z is a complex number that depends on the eccentricity, with the eccentricity, and only we take the eccentricity between 0 and 1 in the elliptic case, and m between 0 and pi because of the symmetry. And everywhere in the domain will be different of 0, except for this value. So this will be the 0 that we want to know, okay? We want to find. Look at this, the function, okay? And remember that this is a complex number. Well, this is our function. This is a complex number. So we replace this here. So we have x plus iy minus e sine of this quantity minus m. Properties of trigonometric function, the sine of a sine is sine cosine plus cosine sine. We have one minus. Before we put minus, minus, minus. But we have the sign of an imaginary number and the sign of an imaginary number. Okay. How can we manage that? By means of other functions that are the hyperbolic function, trigonometric function. The hyperbolic cosine is defined as the exponential of y plus the exponential of minus y over 2. And the sine, hyperbolic sine, will be the same, but with a minus here. And it is easy to see that cosine to the square minus sine to the square is equal to 1. This is the difference between trigonometric and hyperbolic function. In the trigonometric, this must be a plus, and here is a minus. But remember that we are concerned with these two expressions. So a to the y, I put plus 1 as the product of I times minus y. Okay? Because I times y is minus 1, with the minus is a plus. So this will be equal, and we apply the formula of the imaginary, of the complex number. That will be cosine of the argument plus I sine of the argument. But the cosine of minus something is plus cosine of plus the argument, and the sine of minus something is minus the sine of the argument. Okay? And what happens with x2 minus y that appear here? Instead of putting I times minus I put I times I. This will be a minus. Apply the same formula, and this is shorter. If we add, this cancel with this one, so we have the x to the y plus e to the minus y will be twice the cosine of I, so divided by 2, and we have the cosine, the hyperbolic cosine. So this fellow is exactly the hyperbolic cosine of y. Instead of making the addition, we make the subtraction, because by using this, and we have a minus, but we multiply by I, and eventually we obtain this expression. Let's say that this part, sine of the imaginary unit times y, is the imaginary unit times the hyperbolic sine of y. So we don't care about that, because are either real or imaginary, but the hyperbolic functions cosine and sine. And that is what we will replace here. This was below, but is in the next. So when we replace that in our function, what we get is that still is a complex number, real part, and imaginary part. But inside, in the real or the imaginary, everything is real. So if this is equal to 0, the f in this point is equal to 0, that means that this must be equal to 0, so the real part must be 0, and the complex part will be equal to 0. This is the way to obtain a 0, the 0 of the function. And also we can see that if a number is a solution, the conjugate also is a solution. So we restrict to the semi-plane y greater than 0, because with negative we have the same result. So we have to solve this system to obtain x and y, solution of this system of two equations with two unknowns. So from one of them, we may have cosine of x, that will be a function of g. This function is this part. This function is continuously decreasing function. In 0 is equal to 1, because the limit of this is 1, and in infinity it tends to 0. So that means that we start in 0 and is decreasing. No, we start in 1 when x is equal to 0. The function takes the value equal to 1, and in infinity goes to 0, and is decreasing continuously. So that means that between 1 and 0, that is asymptotic to 0, because the function is continuous and decreasing, we cover all possible values. And in particular, 4 will be a number between 0 and 1, such that there is only one solution that satisfies that, and is defined only for this value. Also, it's well known that the cosine is an even function of period 2 pi, so that complicates a bit, because if we restrict only to the interval 0 to pi, there will be only that, but we have to carry on all these 2k pi, okay? Will be a solution plus 2 pi plus 4 pi plus, so that means that we have a multivariate function. And with this x, we go to the other equation, and eventually we have this is the other condition. Okay, so we have x, and also from here we have y as the arc cosine, hyperbolic cosine of something. So we are able to obtain x and y. Well, there are some details, but we don't pay much attention of that. If you have interest, you can read that in the paper. And the result is that for certain case there is no solution for k negatives, because to the and there is only one solution for k greater than 1, and we have all these sequence that are with for different values of k, 1, 2, 3. So there are many solutions. And this is what is important. The others are details, but no. What is important is the final result. That the complex root of the complex Kepler equation satisfy that for eccentricity equal to 0, there is only one solution. So it's the circular, the eccentric anomaly is exactly the same as the mean anomaly and exactly the same as the true anomaly. So no big deal. But for all eccentricity between 0 and 1, there is only a unique real equation. That is the solution that we are interested in, because we are interested in the real solution. If one complex number is solution, its conjugate is also solution. And for a complex solution, there is an infinite number of solutions. That is the original plus or minus chi pi. So this is the important. That between 0 and 1, there is only a unique real equation, and for that is the complex number is solution, the conjugate is solution, and they are infinite. And with that, we can obtain the solutions. And this is the complex. So this case is for the eccentricity equal to 0.5. Here the real solution depending on the values of the m, and the imaginary, the complex number, that is the one at the conjugate, we see the symmetry here, are only in the negative part. So here we have the possible solution, the solutions always in this part, and here and here. So if we want to obtain a closed line englobing only the unique 0, we have to take circles or whatever closed line around here or around here. But if we take one, for instance, a circle with a big radius, what we have is something like that. And the theorem cannot be applied because it contains 3 different zeros, one real, plus one here, plus another here. Okay, so we have to restrict to small lines or small curves that enclose only the real 0, that is the one of our interest. And also it's known that if the length is small, the accuracy is better. And we start with the circular contours of radius rho and the center mu. And as I explained at the beginning, this is the definition of a circular curve, a circle. Okay? And must contain the only root of the Kepler equation. Because of the properties of the Kepler equation, this derivative is always positive. That means that it is increasing. And this is negative, so that means that the convexity is like that. And we have this is the eccentric anomaly, the blue line in terms of the mean anomaly. So since we want to have the solution and the radius will be the smaller possible, and in order to have more accuracy and also to don't contain the complex zeros, one possible way is to find bounds as we did the other day. So we trace the line from here to here. That will be the straight line E equal to M. That will be this. So this will be the lower bound. And because of the mean value theorem, there is only one point in which the tangent to the curve is exactly the same as the gradient of the straight line, or in other words, these two lines are parallel, and this will be the point where the line is tangent to the curve. So this is m plus e, and this will be the upper bound. So this allows us to define the radius as the subtraction over half, and the center of the circle will be this plus this divided by 2. So eventually this is one possible curve with the center this quantity and radius the centricity over 2. Okay? And it satisfies the conditions. And this is the circle. This is the coordinates of the center, and this is the radius, the centricity over 2. And we see that we are always around here, and even when we are close to here, we are less than the complex numbers were here or here. So this is very simple and provides the solution. Also, we can obtain shorter length. How? Just doing similar to the other day, but no, I will not enter much in detail, just splitting the interval. We can put whatever we want in one point, we call left and right, and the other interval from here to the other. So this will be an example. And from here to here, we have a circle, and from here to here, we will define another circle. And we see that the radius in both cases are much smaller than in the other case that were just the centricity over 2. So it's possible to play with this in order to have the very short length. First, in the example of before, we always see that if this is the straight rho equal to the centricity, the two radius are always less than the other. So if the radius is smaller, the length will be much smaller. And also, once we have defined the closest line, we proceed to compute the solution. This will be the solution according to the Jackson theorem. Take now into account that this is the part of the Fourier expansion corresponding to the number -2, and this to the number -1. So this will be the exact solution and will be the numerical solution, because we have to compute that to approximate these Fourier coefficients numerically. The n means numerical. And this will be the exact. If there is no script, is the exact solution, and this is our approximation, the numerical. And again, with the other colleagues, the Philkor, Goodman, and Slepian, they use the fast Fourier transform, and in our case, we use the composite trapezoidal rule that I explained in the video the other day. And in our case, there are some simplifications because we need only two numbers, while they have to obtain all numbers and then select these two. But because of -2 and 1, there is a relation that reduce our interval of integration. Instead of -pi to pi, we reduce to 0 to pi, and from 0 to pi, so we need half part of the numbers than the other, so we need to do half computations. What else? No, we skip that. So we were thinking also in having curves with the smallest possible length. Why do we restrict to have only circles? Well, circles are easy to represent. It's very smooth curve, so everything is working well. But it's known that an ellipse has less length than one circle. So why don't we use ellipses instead of circles? So we try to do that. And we take the same as if it were a circle, but we modify we introduce here a quantity epsilon that will be the semi-minor axis of the ellipse. So just by introducing a number here, between 0 and 1, we reduce the length of the, otherwise we will have the circle, and now we have an ellipse. And we do exactly the same, just putting the quantity there. Is exactly the same procedure, and these are the results. We took an eccentricity, the eccentricity in the Kepler equation, okay? Because the eccentricity of this ellipse I will call parameter. Has nothing to do with the Kepler equation. Okay? Has to do only with the figure of before. With the line. Okay, so this will be a parameter. We introduce a parameter. So we took a very high eccentricity in the Kepler equation, 0.9. That is very high, and usually when the eccentricity is high, the results are not good. Kepler equation works better if the eccentricity is very small. And these are the results. With the parameter equal to 1, as mean a circle, 1 over 2, 1 over 4, 1 over 8. This is not 0. This will be 1 over 124. This will be 0. We no longer have a closed curve, but a segment. And there is no number inside the segment. Okay? And we see that the colors are exactly the same. That we reach much better approximation. These are the logarithm of the errors for small values of the parameter than for the circle. But in some cases, we have even 3, 4 significant digits. Just adding one parameter there. Okay? The previous was in the composite trapezoidal rule, one for, I think, for n equal to 8, endpoints in the grid for computing the integral, the numerical quadrature. And this for 16, and we see the behavior is always the same. We have the smaller the parameter, the better result we have. But we see that comparing with the other, we have also, just with 16 points instead of 8, more 4, 5 more digits of precision. And for 32, let's just, here we have 15. So with 42, we have between 20 and 30 exact digits. Okay? And we put only 32 points on the grid. Very fast evolution. And also, they are kind of possible to make optimization between the, when I mean optimization is just to make better approximation, taking into account the properties of the cosine and sine because of these properties of periodicity. And also, we store some the evaluation of the trigonometric function that we need once, and we don't need to compute again, but we call the stored point. So and this is comparison in CPU time with the fast Fourier transfer, the trapezoidal rule. Also, we did with another method, the mean point, and this is with the optimization that I mentioned now. And we see that trapezoidal and mean point gives very similar results concerning the CPU time. But both cases are better than the fast Fourier transform. And when we apply these simplification rules, we almost reduce by half the computing time. So it's really very fast and very accurate. And we don't care about the starter of the iterative methods, that this is a headache continuously to choose a starter that may convergent the method or not. Here the method is valid everywhere, is very fast, and also is easy to compute. But I think I stop here. Thank you.
Professor, I have one question about the computation time. I think the other slide. And I'd like to know, the CPU time is it's about hours, days, minutes.
Okay. I have not here the graphic, but we compute for 100 mile times because you use once, this number is not significant. You repeat other time, it will be different. So we compute for 100,000 times and make the average of all computing time. And was of the order of less than microseconds.
Okay.
It was really very fast.
Very fast. Yeah. Thank you.
More questions? No? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.